So anyway, I was trying to think about what I could talk to this community that would really be interesting, and I think it's a very inventive community. And so I wanted to talk about inventing, and especially if you have a reputation for simple things and you want to make a wiki that's even simpler and more powerful. So that's the story I want to tell. And this happened almost 2 years ago. I applied for this position as a fellow in working with sustainability data, and in my application I made a promise. And my promise was to give numbers, data, depth and meaning. And by depth and meaning I meant stuff where people would actually trust the numbers. I went on to say depth and meaning for ordinary people that they can depend upon every day. And of course, what I was alluding to there was Wikipedia, which has given, I think, words, depth, and meaning that people depend upon every day. There's a magic in Wiki, and it was the encyclopedia people who did it. I acknowledge that, not me, but there was a creation there that I think works for the encyclopedia article, but doesn't work for data sets yet. So I wanted to make sustainability data as alive and real for people as Wikipedia has made the encyclopedia valuable. Of course, if you think of data, you think of numbers, pages of numbers, and one thing that's clear is if you're an accountant and you look at a page of numbers like that, you do see a company. You know, there's something behind those numbers, and they're trained to see that, but most people just see a sea of numbers. Or if you're a weatherman and you see a page of numbers like this, you know, you'll see the wind in there. But most people, you know, it's a struggle to see these maps and highs and lows, and I always zone out during the weather of what they're even talking about. But this is a visualization that just knocks me out, because you know, you cannot help but look at that and see the wind blowing all over the country. And this Hint FM is a visualization site with a lot of different interesting work on it, but they have this for every day, and a sampling of some pretty neat hurricanes and stuff like that. But this was 2 days ago when I just happened to see it, and I see things are pretty quiet there in Salt Lake. But today it probably looks different. Anyway, this is the kind of thing that the computers we have, the browsers we have the capability of doing this. I was also struck by this package called D3, and really it's just a kind of like a jQuery-ish wrapper around SVG, the vector graphics, which has been, you know, in browsers but not orderly, but it's, you know, real attempt to make it orderly. This is my first D3 mashup, and here you can see what I'm doing is I'm plotting the location of factories. But these factories, you know, they happen to be mostly in China, and they're all within blocks of each other, so you can't have a map at 2 scales at once, but you can. So here I'm kind of modeling push pins, and what I did is I took 2 different sample programs out of D3, one that did maps and another one that did this, you know, spring force physics simulator. And I just said, well, if I want to do a push pin, I want to model the push pin with a physics simulator, which normally it wouldn't work that hard, but now it's all of a sudden easy. And so I think this is the palette for visualization, is to do complicated computations that are made simple by wrapping these things in progressively more sophisticated libraries. So now, this is going on without me, but I say, well, what does this have to do with Wiki? How can I make a wiki where we have data sets, and visualizations, and make that come together? So I call it a federated wiki because I want to pull these things from different sites. I want the sharing that we associate with Wiki to be sharing not within multiple people on a single site, but across multiple sites. And this is something that I've been dreaming of, for a long time, but I said, let's see if we can make it work, because there's more going on in the browser now than ever before. Here's a traditional wiki. It's, again, it's a database and a web interface to that database, and it lets a bunch of people use it. This is a federated wiki. All I did is move the sharing part out of the server and up to the client. Now, there's still server components, but the server component has a lot less to do than the client did. And so, kind of figuring out what the implications of that are. Now, I also, there has to be this edit capability, and this is how it looks on Wikipedia. This is how it looks in mine. Here's a page that has a paragraph, and if you click that, you see an editor of the paragraph text. It looks rather boring. But here's a visualization, and if you click on that, you see a markup that isn't about being a paragraph. It's about being one of these n-dimensional charts. And here it says, well, these are the dimensions, and these are the maximum scales, and so forth. And while you're even editing this, you can bring up one more page, which is a complete specification of the language, which fits on one of these little pages, because I have lots of little markups that give me lots of little ways. Well, some people would call these a DSL, lots of little DSLs that give me control over small areas of a page that's going to be shared with other pages. So I wanted to, talking about creativity a little bit, I want to talk about the process that I used for kind of stumbling into this, and then I'll show you a little bit more of the results. I started out by saying, let's make it work with a mobile. So I just said, let's make pages narrow. And once we make pages narrow, on my laptop I can get them 4 wide or 5 wide, and on a big screen I can get 10 or 20 or 30. And I thought that was important, that I'm going to pull content from a lot of places. On my phone, it's always handy. On my laptop, I can work with multiple sites. And if I have a lot of content that is all kind of scattered all over, I can rearrange it, refactor it. So that was important. In dealing with one particular set of data, which was what I promised to do, I took the effort to deeply understand what was behind the data. There was documentation. I went and took every single page. There's 50 pages of documentation, highlighted any word that talked about data, categorized those words, built a model of what people were talking about. And then I said, well, let's imagine a wiki with a bunch of pages that fit this model, and I kind of laid it out on a table. And here I'm kind of imagining, the information architecture, but I'm casting it all as these things with little data sets, and visualizations, and all on separate pages, and that somebody would pull up some combination of these for their interest in the moment, and see both the data that they can control and edit and the visualizations. So with no more vision than that, I said, okay, let's make it work. And this is kind of funny, because they hired me as the expert, and I said, this is what you need, even though I wasn't exactly sure what it was. And then over the period of the year, I just kept playing with the software, and I want to show you 5 different things. This is number 0, so this is what I had already decided there would be. There'd be pages with data sets and images and paragraphs, and at the very bottom, I had the complete history of the page. This is edit command objects sort of thing. So these command objects, well, if you touch any of those, you can see what paragraphs were involved. And here I clicked on one and dredged up an old version. So you have this complete history, and it's visualized. Now, the other thing that's interesting is this binding, and I'll show you how these 2 ideas work together. This one important discovery that I could do is that I pull up a page that has a visualization on it. Here I've gotten real simple. I have simple temperature data, and I have a simple graph, but the graph doesn't know that the graph is there to graph data. Instead, when I pull the second page up, it looks around for other pages, and in kind of like this magnetic attraction, it attaches to the page to the left and draws that data. So now what's, so here it is. That's the, and that's, you know, done by finding things in the DOM and so forth. But here's where it gets really cool. Here, this page is actually a copy of a page off a server in my basement that has temperature data. So if I click that page, I can call up the original. So now notice this is a different icon. It's red instead of the yellow, and it's actually more current data. And when I pull up the same graph page, so I have 3 pages here, 2 versions of air temperature and 2 copies of the very same line drawing program, but because of that binding, it draws a different picture. So this I was starting to feel that I could pull stuff off of different sites and expect the pages to work together. The other thing I did is you're copying and copying and copying stuff around. There's this sense that you'll lose track of where things are. So wikis have always had kind of an internal link and an external link. External link is like every other link on the internet. But the internal link, I say, well, I can do a little more. And here, as I roll over these links, you know, it says, well, it could be a couple different places. So here it's saying it might be on the original site, or it might come from this thing down here. And so just because I have this evidence, that little flag is the fork. That was a page was forked off into a different wiki. And so it has these different things. And when you finally click on it, you discover, well, it found it in the right place. So there's a lot of dynamic searching. This is a lot like object-oriented programming, where you search for up a hierarchy to find out where a page is. So here's another thing that really surprised me, but when I put it together, it just delighted me. And that was when I click on a page that doesn't exist. You know, I look in the places where I expect to find it. I call it the context. Here it brings up this page. It says we couldn't find the page in the expected context. This would be called a red link. But then I say, oh, but I looked around a little more in some other places you're looking. It just happens to have this page. So that's this notion of the history of the page and how it's moved around tells you what the link should mean. But if that's broken, it looks a little farther. It looks in what I call the neighborhood, and this is one where I knew I had a page called Purdue University because I went to Purdue, so I just edited it in there, and it says, oh, you probably want this Purdue. So it suggests this. So that's this neighborhood. It knows the neighborhood because whenever it sees mentions of a site, this is your browser, it goes and fetches a sitemap, and here's what a sitemap looks like. It has names and dates and synopsis, which is usually just the first paragraph of the page, and that's enough to produce this little summary here. It says this is the Purdue that you're looking for. The other thing is the fetching of those sitemaps down in the lower right-hand corner. This is all these different sites, and so I have this kind of family resemblance of the icons being these gradients. So here, when I search, I just search for patterns, and so these are all the different places where you would find that. And depending upon where you've been looking, that's where you search. So if you don't find it, you look around a little more and try to search again. The other thing is, this is where you get recent changes. You want to say, well, what's going on this federated wiki? And it just goes down here. There's like 12 different sites I was looking at. And it says, well, on these 12 different sites, this is where. And you can see I was working on the MountainWest RubyConf talk there, and a few other things. So again, I say I want to make a bunch of sites feel like they're one site, and this is the kind of thing that makes that happen. So this is the federated wiki sharing in the browser. Now then I got to thinking, well, you know, I wasn't actually being agile in this because I was trying to please myself instead of somebody else. I did have my sponsor in mind, but I think that this is something as we get so good at agile, we have to think of what else we can do. This is a video. How many people have seen this video? Brett, Victor? You know, it's a fabulous video, and I was looking at Mike Bostock, who did the D3, and I was also looking at Brett Victor, who does a lot of visualization stuff. And then this talk came along, and I said, this describes what's really going on. And what he says is he says, well, his idols are these people like Alan Kay and so forth, who had this vision of how computers should work. And I'm thinking, gosh, those were my idols too. And then he says, well, this is what you have to do to really, pursue that vision. And that is, there's principles you're trying to solve. It's not just this burn down of features that somebody's telling you to do. I actually put together a page where I said, these are what I'm trying to do. Right up there at the top, it says the new wiki is going to innovate 3 ways. The federation, the refactoring, and the visualization. I've in a quiet way, shown you all of those. I just started making videos as I was going on and doing this discovery. First of all, I called it smallest. This is saying I'm not trying to make the best wiki ever. I'm trying to make an innovative wiki, and I'm going to leave out a lot of stuff. It's actually kind of hard to use because I leave out a lot of stuff, but what it does do, right, it does well. Of course, working on GitHub makes a big difference, sharing stuff on Twitter. So if I compare Agile, and by the way, I love the way that so many concepts of Agile are just the normal way we work. But on an Agile project, what you're really going for is this velocity. You just want to just keep delivering, have people trust you because you deliver regularly, that velocity. Whereas what I did is I said, well, I'll know that I'm getting somewhere if I can keep it small, keeping it small. Velocity is about getting a lot. Keeping it small is small. Also, in Agile, you're trying to, there's 2 parties. There's the people with the need and the people with the capability. And the people with the need we call customers. But here, I was driven by curiosity. On any given week, I could have a hot button somewhere else. I wonder if I could do this. I wonder if I could do this. What would this be like? And that curiosity, being curiosity-driven, is fabulous if you can get away with it. By that, I know that all of us have to work for a living, and fortunately, we can have enough time left over to do some amazing thing. And if you get old and wise, then maybe even get a job like I did, where you get to do it for a whole year. The other thing is, in Agile, it's all, you're doing things right if you have confidence in your code. And I'll tell you, this DevOps thing is the epitome of that. When people say, oh yeah, we deploy 20 times a day, they just know what's going to happen. And they know if they're surprised, they know what they're going to do. And that confidence is wonderful. But in the work I was doing, I would say, wonder and delight. When I was surprised, the things I showed you all surprised me what it felt like to use them. And I'll tell you, a lot of things I tried didn't work, but that wasn't a negative thing at all either. So this is a lot of people say, well, what's after Agile? In a sense, I'm probing what's after Agile. Now, I do want to show you a couple of things, and just in case the Wi-Fi didn't work, I put a few movies in here. I want to show you a couple of movies that are on that site. And these are, the last 9 months, I haven't even really worked much in the core. There's plenty of work to do on the core, but I've been making plugins that interact different way. And so, when you add a paragraph, you hit that plus sign. It says, I want to add a new paragraph. It says, well, I could be any kind of paragraph, and it says, here's a few you might want. Or you can just start typing, and it becomes a text paragraph. But there's also, in the help documentation, it says, well, there's more than that. There's more things you could make. So down here in plugin documentation, this is just in the wiki, there's long lists of pages about different plugins. And these plugins are really, this isn't that unusual. Anybody that ever did what do you call it, where you have the dashboard widgets and so forth, These are like widgets, except that they're widgets that work in this sharing environment. So it's not widgets on your screen, it's widgets on this shared environment of Wiki. So here's one that I like. You click this, and you get a page of documentation. Again, this has got a little markup, and it says, here's how the lines work, and it's a little calculator. The calculator is meant to be really simple, but I show you how to add 2 plus 3 to get a sum of 5. You can double click on that and get a hint of what the markup for calculator is. But I also do the classic bottles of beer calculation. The other thing I wanted to mention is this is where you go if you want to see the source. You know, you get these plugins, you just assume that the documentation tells you where to find the source. I'd like to show you. Oh, I forgot to plug in my audio cable. I got distracted. Hear that sound?
Might be a little quiet. We'll see.
I'd like to show you the demo that I presented at this year's open source conference. These pages are available for you to experiment with at oscon.fed.wiki.org. This is what you'll find if you go to that site. Here's a little instructions that I wrote to go through the demo. Mostly this brings up the method plugin, which is, here's the documentation for it, that shows you how to do simple calculations. This is simple in that I can just edit this, maybe modify that calculation. I'll do a Command S to save, and there it is. I can try this again, maybe make it even bigger. Actually, just clicking outside the window will save, so I get 112 and 3 is 115. Now, what I really wanted to show off is how I can refactor content on the wiki to make it easier for people to understand and change it. Let's just go to this little remove local storage pages, and we'll reset everything. You can try this over and over. Your changes will be saved in your own browser. And if we go back here, we're back to 2 plus 3 is 5. So another page is the bottles of beer song. This shows how I compute each verse of the 99 bottles of beer song, and I do it in a very simple way. I just start with 99, subtract 1, show what is the sum at the moment, subtract another, show what the sum is at the moment. Now, because I put labels on all these numbers, I don't actually have to specify them over and over. So here I can just say take one down and pass it around, and I'll get the -1 that I showed up there. We'll click outside here. And then we see we still get the 97 bottles of beer. Here I also show doing the same thing. I say bottles of beer on the wall. It looks up the page. In fact, it'll keep on looking, finds the 97 and carries on. I could do the same thing here. I don't need that -1. Save, and I get 96. This keeps on working. I have a data set here, some beer constants. This is going to get my song done in a hurry. I say take a few down, and it's like a -3, and take a bunch down is -90. So here we pick up the 96, take a few more, take a bunch down, and we're finally done with the song. 0 bottles of beer on the wall. Now, what I'd like to do is take these last few paragraphs and kind of spread those around. Here it suggests, why don't I create a page?
So what I love about that is, you know, this is kind of a test for a language, and I got the bottles of beer song done faster than anybody else on the internet there. The other thing is behind the scenes there, you know, there's some hash to taking those names. So, you know, in there, I'm creating a scope of variable names and managing that. And a lot of the discovery is figuring out how to define scope in a concept, this dynamic. And now I'm going to start dragging things between pages to rearrange this song. And that was my torture test to make sure that the scope is right, even as I'm rearranging the content on pages.
Page for the beer constants. If I shift-click that creates this new page, and I'll just drag these constants over there. First, an explanation of what it is, and then the constants, and it's that simple. Now, I can do the same thing here with the verses. Let me just go back to just the beer page and then bring up the final verses. Oops, the beer page in Shift. to bring up the final verses. That gets me the thing. Now notice that this isn't computing very well here now because I lost those constants, but we'll have that fixed in short order. So let's, that little paragraph of explanation, and then the constants over there, and now we're ready to go back and look at the whole thing. If I call up the beer methods, shift-click to get the constants, and shift-click to get the final verses, and there we are, 0 bottles of beer on the wall. And so this computation is looking to the left and finding these numbers and finding this 96 to finish the computation.
So this was last summer, and I felt that, you know, hey, I'm not going to crash and burn because I could do some stuff that seemed sort of magical. The thing is, I had hundreds of pages of data that come from some of the most complicated spreadsheets I'd ever seen, transferred it into this where you could do this simple column of calculation. I called it middle school math, but for graduate level chemistry, because it was all about materials and the chemistry of materials. But it was hard, you know, spreadsheets sometimes explode in their complexity. In this environment, there's not a lot of room to explode in complexity. And part of that is the way that I used just managing these hashes and names and bindings and so forth. Of course, when you talk about data, a lot of people think of those tables and numbers and the Alan Kay, Brett Victor, you know, admires Alan Kay. I admire Alan Kay. Alan Kay was asked by Scientific American, you know, you don't submit papers to Scientific American. They come to you. And they went to Alan Kay and said, explain computers to the Scientific American readership. And instead of going off into small talk, he said, well, let me explain spreadsheets. You know, because spreadsheets give you this nice dynamic model, and they work so well. You know, in a sense, I'm treading on spreadsheet territory, and that's one reason I didn't want to put up a page of numbers, because then people would ask how you do your profit and loss statement. But in this, he explains the spreadsheet, and then he shows you how to do bar graphs using spreadsheet cells as pixels. And that's, I just love that way of kind of twisting the model. So I want to show you one more video, and this is where I'm thinking one of the powers here is that if everybody kind of brings their own disk to this sharing environment called the Federated Wiki, if somebody brings a disk full of spam, you know, you just don't hook it into yours. You keep it out, keep that spam out of your neighborhood. The only way you're going to have spam in your wiki is you go hunt it down and fork it in, right? You know, so you're not going to do that. But there's also this capability, and here I'm experimenting. I say, well, I've got a few pages that are about, you know, a sensor in my backyard, but I wanted to be more interactive than just watching the weather, and so. I spent a lot of time fiddling around with little microcomputer stuff just as a recreation, and I had this little mini language called TechSign, which is for twiddling bits, and I've done a lot of stuff, and I said, let me make a plugin for TechSign, and TechSign would be on attached hardware hooked to a particular server through USB, and what happens is on the page, the plugin, not the page or not wiki, but the plugin itself just says, oh, well, let me go back to that server, open a WebSocket connection, and get a low latency connection. And this is when the documents become not documents, but become user interface, shared user interface, all in their own right.
I'd like to show you some of the work I'm doing connecting things to a federated wiki. And this is the sort of thing I'm talking about. This is a little computer board, kind of like an Arduino. This one's called a Teensy, popular in the hacker spaces that I hang out. This one has a flash card, 4 gigabytes of storage attached to it, and a digital thermometer. So this could be a data recorder. It also has a USB port on it, and I like to stream programs into that port. And what I'd like to show you today is some plugins I've built that support that. All of these that I have, I put a little interpreter right down here on the board that interprets a simple language that I call TechSign. TechSign has very simple commands like I for input and O for output. So you just stream sentences in a string of characters and it will do things. So this is the one that I would like to show you today. This has the cord hooked up to it, and the USB is connected to the Express version of the server, and Express node turns out to be pretty sweet for running plugins both client-side and server-side, and connecting between those with a WebSocket. So it gives me a nice low-latency, bi-directional communication. So this is the documentation that describes this plugin, and here's an example. This one, whenever the page opens, it asks the little computer to explain what version of microcontroller is there, and then it uses the V command to print that version. Here it says an 18 mega 32U4, and that's what that little chip is. So we've already done a turnaround to this computer. In the documentation, I do mention other things, like here's a list. H says, tell me all the commands you can do, so we can just see what the computer says. It says what commands are available, and here's a list. If you don't happen to have a computer connected or a little Teensy, I made a copy of the list, and you can see the kind of commands that I
So there's something cool there. You know, first of all, this is a super small computer. All the commands are single letters. Except for the quote command, which is underscore, and I just did a little bit of that. But what's cool is even in the documentation page, I'm not sure what's actually plugged in at the end of that. So I say it probably does these commands, but we'll just send the H command, the help command, and down over the USB off or WebSocket the server, and pull back the documentation out of the chip itself to see what this particular chip has been programmed to do. So that there's a connectivity there. The fact that the documentation is in the same environment as the wiki itself makes that possible.
More importantly, I've created some examples. First, you should notice all those are lowercase, and in the plugin, I use uppercase to talk to the plugin. So the uppercase commands are executed client-side, and it manages the transmission of TechSign programs to the server and from the server onto this device. So here are some examples. Of course, what anybody does with a little microcontroller, there's an LED on here, and you want to make it blink. So this is the blink program, and when that starts, it blinks once a second, and this is what that looks like. It says here, every second, send down a command to select the right pin, output a 1, wait 40 milliseconds, output a 0, and call that a blink. It also says every time the thumb moves over a data set, send out an even shorter blink. So here it is blinking every second, and it says here it's receiving the word blink, so we know what's going on. But as I scrub over this data, we see that we get those kind of faint little, very short blinks continuously. And so that's all being mixed in because we're sending two kinds of programs down to the device. Now, one thing I also have on here is a speaker. It's a little piezoelectric speaker. And so let's try this program. This program sends Morse code. And so it's kind of an interesting program in that I define client-side a bunch of words like how to send Morse code. And here you can see it's showing me the stack as it runs through that macro, calling macro, calling macro, calling macro until it finishes. So the program says here on open, turn on the transmitter and send out a call, and then every minute after that, just send out a shortened call, which we call an ident, or identification, in ham radio. So this is ham radio stuff being done with TechSign and Federated Wiki. So to kind of pile on more things here, let me show you a neat little application. We'll just let that run to completion. This one controls this chip. It started out, it turned on the colon, and it says every minute or no, every second, update the seconds in the display. So this is writing seconds to those last 2 digits. It also wrote the colon. And this one also listens to the thumb, and so when I scroll over on data and that, it puts the data position in the first digit. And this is just showing, again, this idea that I can have different programs talking to different resources. Here, different registers in the same part, and it's all getting mixed together through the WebSockets, going to the node server and on to the USB and so forth. Finally, one thing I like to do is here I'm sending just short little bursts, a high and then a low, and it sounds like a click coming out of the speaker. And this again once a second. And so in this program I say every second output a pulse and then collect the samples. That's the ident on the minute. And then collect some samples. Here it says sample on A to D converter channel 11, and P says print that result back up the USB all the way here to Wiki. So when this runs, we can see we're also getting the blink back message there, but we're getting a number. Let's just stop that blank here. If I say, just reload the thing in that way.
That's rebooting the web
Now we're doing the
page.
ticks and we're getting just the data. And if I double click this, I can see what the data looks like. Every second I get a new set of data, so that data is changing. But what's cool is that data that's coming off of this chip, when I get it back into the client, I say, well, send that out in case anybody's interested. Like here's that D3 line program that I used to look at, I still can look at the temperature in my backyard over a day. Here I'm looking at the vibrating of that speaker, which is ringing like a bell. It's ringing like a bell, but it's ultrasonic. I can't hear it. But here I say take a sample every 100 microseconds. And those are the samples. This is the decay of the bell and the frequency there. And here's a picture. I did hook a regular oscilloscope up, so that's what it looks like on a regular oscilloscope, and it looks pretty much the same. So we've built an oscilloscope out of the TechSign, plug in a little device to test, and D3 graphics package that we've always had. So I think it's a pretty powerful combination.
Yeah, I said I think this is pretty powerful. And of course what it is I wrote an oscilloscope in 3 lines, and half of the characters in that line was interpreted client side, and the lowercase letters were sent down to the server over USB to a little microcomputer that was doing whatever I asked it to do in the moment, right? And sometimes it was doing 2, 3, 4 things at once. I don't know if you noticed that. It was blinking and sending Morse code and lighting the LEDs all at the same time. And I think that's the dynamic environment that is available to us now that is pretty spectacular. Now, I'm not claiming that I've got an application here. What I have is a foundation for building a lot of stuff and an example of an architecture where we can blur the lines between clients and servers and sites and services. And I think in the end, what we can do is make it alive enough and interpreted enough and visual enough that we really can make something that ordinary people love to browse, love to study, love to understand, and love to depend upon every day. Any questions? Yes. Do I have any additional control on how binding happens between those different things? And there's a lot of people who make kind of wiring diagram things where you draw wires and so forth. And people work really hard on those things, and they, 3 people figure out how to work them. So I wanted something that was simpler than that, and my model was actually the Unix shell, where you have a little program and a pipe and a little program and a pipe and a little program, and it's actually pretty constraining, but man, it has lasted pretty, that's the longest lasting thing that we still use every day, is that pipeline. So I wanted this sort of pipeline effect. Now, inside, it's really just the plugins getting along with other plugins. Wiki sort of, oh, well, I got the pages up there and I give control to you, do what makes sense to you. And that's not quite enough advice, So I think that the direction this is heading is that you will tend to look, lower in the DOM, but maybe not rummage through the DOM so much. There's a lot of kind of sequencing stuff, and this isn't quite perfect yet. I tend to make every plugin work a little differently, but it's going to do this stuff with promises and deferreds and stuff like that, where it will discover an architecture as the plugins are kind of waking up, and then build a model in memory of what that connection is. Will you be able to grab those things and rebind them? Well, I hope so. I hope you'll be able to take a visualization and just roll it over a page full of data, bunch of different data sets. And while that visualization is still in flight, while it's still in the air, that it'll just try binding different places. And when it looks like what you want, you just drop it, and there it is. It's like a magnifying glass, a magnifying visualization. And that's so dynamically possible. Was that a good answer?
Yeah.
Yes.
When you were moving around the pages of the demo, the history boxes were lighting up. Is that when things were added to the page?
If I pointed at a paragraph, it highlighted every, those are basically command objects or edits, same as redo and undo. It just highlighted every one that applied to that paragraph. Or if you pointed at a history item, an element in the journal, an action, it would light up the paragraph that action applied to. So I was trying to connect those. I think there could be more work. For example, if the page gets longer in the screen, you might want it to do a little automatic scrolling and stuff like that. That was an area I thought would be very important, and I got kind of that basic stuff in there, and I've been limping along with it and probing elsewhere. But the question is the history in the journal, is that about changing data, or is that about how you changed your request for data? It's really how you move things around in the page. And once there's a, so kind of in my thought is it says, if you have a site that's changing data without adding a record of it in the journal, then you should have a record of it in the data. So in the case of the weather data, every item had a date, when the sample was taken. So it was sort of managing its own history. And because I do one every minute, I didn't want to fill the journal with a bunch of stuff. So there's also in Wikipedia, there's a lot of history that's kind of global, but I try not to do anything global because this is federated, and so the history is associated with a page. So if I move something around within a page, it knows that it's a move and gets that right. But if I move it to another page, I get a delete from one page and an add to the other. More questions? Yes. I kind of glossed over federation, and the question is what does it mean to fork a page in the context of this federation? And what it really is I can, from a page, kind of follow links across to other sites, and they're all there right in the same window. And if I start editing something that's on your site, it doesn't write back to your site, it writes back to my site. So there's an implicit fork. I might just say, I like it the way you wrote it, but I want it, and there's another little button that just says fork, and then I get it as is. And the fork applies to a page at a time, not to whole sites. But sites tend to be small. In fact, I find that I create sites now like I might have created documents in the past. I think of a site as being my part of a conversation that we're all going to have, where a particular set of words have meaning. Yes? Let me answer that one, because that's a very good question. The question is, because there's JavaScript behind those plugins, the question is, where does that JavaScript come from? And it turns out when you start browsing a site, and it may be your site or it may be somebody else's, but it gets the initial JavaScript load from that, all the stuff to manage the pages. And that's where it goes back to, interesting, that's where it goes back to looking for a more plug-in source. So in a sense, you as a server operator configure your set of plugins that you intend to use, and those are where it's going to look for plugins for pages that grabs from somewhere else. So you can pull a page from somebody else and discover you don't have enough plugins to render all the content on that page. Now, if you're in that situation, then what you do is say, well, heck, why am I trying here? Let's just go to his site and get a load of JavaScript from him and see how he sees his site using his plugins. And what I don't do is I don't automatically move code. And that's because I don't want to be a medium for sharing viruses. I do think that that is the direction that JavaScript is going, where it will be easy to move code around between various sites, but the sandboxing has to get a little tighter on that. So the plugins are managed. The idea is that when you look for the documentation on a plugin, it should always tell you where to get it, in an open source thing. And I think open source is the only way we can actually make plugins that people can trust. The second question. The question is, what would some other service need to add to my wiki before I could view pages from their service? And if they wrote pages in terms of paragraphs and images and stuff like that, nothing. Because how you render a paragraph and how you do an image or how you do a data set is, I've covered that ground. But if they say, well, the example of, I think, was Netflix, if there's a fancy specialized plugin that will view content or, whatever that they want to produce, then they would produce that, put it on their site, and you could always go to their site to view it. If you pulled one of their pages, you might get everything except the viewer, and it would just say, well, I don't know that plugin. Or they could say, well, we'll put this plugin into the open source, say, here's where you go get it, and then anybody who wanted to have that plugin for their site could bring it in. Ultimately, I suspect there will be a plugin store or something with plugins that you'll trust in a little more methodical way for sharing them. I want to make sure that's true, but I haven't built the store yet. Yes? Have I made an API for sharing information? It's kind of all built on an API. Between the client and server, it's just JSON documents. And what I do is I say a JSON's a tree, and the root of the tree has a story and a journal. But once you get down into the story, you get off into this area where it might be a data set, and who knows what that data set is. It might be an image, or it might be, a special TechSigntex interpreter or something. So as you get deeper in the tree, you get more specialized. Yeah, but the basic wiki protocol is just HTTP fetching and storing JSON. The thing I showed at the very end is I can have a plugin that has two parts. It has a client-side part and a server-side part. And in the case I showed, the server-side part was a relay over USB to this hardware. So the client side comes up and it says, HTTP is not good enough for me. I'm going to open up a WebSocket, and I'm going to talk my own private protocol because I control both sides of that. The plugin has a client-side part and a server-side part. And by the way, that's when it gets a little tricky. That stuff I've been working in Node because Node encourages that JavaScript on the server side. I'm started in Ruby on the server side, and it served me well. But I'm looking for ways to carry that tradition forward. By the way, there are multiple implementations on the server, and that's been very useful for me because it reminds me always to see if I can do something on the client first. Was that a good answer? Yeah.
I have a related question.
Related question?
Is that tree structure of data, does it follow like the ATOS principle so that once you get a node, you can connect to all other nodes of the graph through it? Or do you have to have additional external information, documentation on how to traverse the graph and how the API works?
I'm not sure what ATOS principle is, but I want everything to be discoverable, but I also don't want any central repository of documentation or anything. So if you get a plugin, you get the documentation for that plugin in the little bundle that is the plugin. So there's pages that'll show up on the screen that you're really pulling out of the plugin, and that's where the documentation is. The thing is, as you're going down, a page is this tree. As you get deeper into it, you'll get into, oh, this is a paragraph that uses this plugin, and if you don't have that plugin, you can still see what's in the JSON, but you might not be able to make sense of it. You might have to go get that plugin. So you have to get, you find the plugin, documentation, and it says, here's where you find the source for the plugin up in some open source thing, and you go to that source, and then there will presumably be all the things you need to do something specialized.
Can the software just go to it and consume it, or does the user have to interact and make it all work?
The software does it for doing as intended, but if you want to grow it and do more. One more question. I think that this is an area where it gets kind of, I've really tried very hard to make sure that I'm not in a position to make any money off of this, that I've pushed everything out, that it can all be open, and I think we'll have to, the question is probably answered in the videos, or we can talk about it. And do we have time for one more? Or, I have to say, it's good to see Bill walking up here, because, being the don't think guy, just do, I looked at Bill's abstract, and he says, hey, we need to do more thinking. And I guess we had dinner the first night and talked about this, and we're on the same wavelength, even if we're going at right angles. But this is, I started out saying, look, this is a thinking community, and here's how I'm thinking, and I want to skip that last question and let Bill get up here and do his thing, because I know it's going to be great.
Awesome.